This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the medical advice of physicians. The listener should regularly consult a physician in matters relating to their health, and particularly with respect to any symptoms that may require diagnosis or medical attention. Thank you and enjoy listening. Back in March this year, I had the privilege of being at the Cosmetic conference in Sydney, and I happened to be sitting in the audience when one Dean Kilby gave his keynote speech. It absolutely blew me away. He talked to the audience about stem cells, about his background in getting into molecular medicine, and I knew immediately that I had to have him on our podcast, Difficult Conversations About Beauty. So we are lucky enough today to have Dean on our episode, and I want to tell you just a little bit about him before we actually meet him. Now, Dean is educated in biochemistry and microbiology. He graduated with first-class honours in biotechnology and undertook subsequent postgraduate training in molecular medicine. I mean, that is a mouthful and a half. What a brain this guy has. His scientific and clinical experience has since spanned the pharmaceutical industry, medical communication, and scientific consulting, from metabolic disease to regenerative medicine, both in Australia and internationally. Further to this, Dean has extensive experience in transformational performance coaching and has been a leading trainer across the ANZ region for almost 15 years. He founded Simpler Health with a commitment to contribute the possibility of being well to big people with big lives. And it's really interesting because when you hear the word big people, you think that means large people, but he actually is referring to people who have big lives in terms of our modern day life. We have to do a lot. There's a lot involved in being a human being today, and that's what he means by being big people with big lives. So settle in. This is actually a two-part series because Dean and I just couldn't stop chatting about pretty much everything that is fascinating in the world today. So this is first episode. Enjoy. Thank you so much, Dean, for coming on our little podcast, Difficult Conversations About Beauty, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So, Dean, I am delighted to have you here. Like I've just been saying off air, I'm absolutely thrilled. I met Dean back in March, so only a couple of months ago, really, in Sydney at Cosmetic. And I just had to, in all sorts of ways, I had to have you on this, but I want to get you involved in other things that I'm doing later in the year. But you talked about all sorts of interesting things, namely regenerative health, regenerative medicine, stem cells, what is beauty, all of the things, and also people taking ownership for their own behaviours in life. So, Dean, can you just tell us a little bit about you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I look like this and I sound like this.
Fantastic.
So, my original background training is in biochemistry, microbiology, biotechnology. I did some postgraduate studies in molecular cell biology and cell metabolism and growth regulation. So that was kind of like a lifetime ago. And I'm so far removed from that world.
Wow.
But I don't know, there was I think a sense of dissatisfaction of being in such a controlled environment, 22.5 degrees Celsius. That was standard laboratory conditions. Everything on my desk was labeled, all the reagents. So it was all very, very controlled. And, you know, the only people I seemingly got to interact with were other scientists, which, you know, to a degree was intellectually stimulating, but, you know, bigger picture, I was bored. And so it took me a good number of years to kind of figure out what's my gig and what's the pathway for me. And, you know, the more I searched, the more I realized there just wasn't one, and I had to carve it out myself. So I have explored many different areas and met with and learned from some amazing people from here in Australia and around the world. And as you can tell, I have some ADHD tendencies and tend to, you know, just throw myself at a number of things from, I don't know, I guess, you know, if you look look at Simpler Health, which I created. And Simpler is an acronym. So it stands for the science of immunometabolic preparedness or protection, longevity, and regeneration. Simpler.
Ah, excellent. Well, that is honestly all of that acronym is absolutely fascinating in the world at the moment, and especially when we're looking at not necessarily treating disease, but preventing disease.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So that kind of encompasses the areas of interest for me. And in addition to that, I kind of marry together wherever I can, both the science and some of the training I've had in performance coaching and transformation. So, wherever I see I can contribute and make a difference, I'm always looking to dive in and add my little bit if I can.
Yeah, wonderful. And that it's almost like what you do add to all of these things that you're doing has such a unique kind of twist to it. It really does. It's kind of unique to you, obviously, but unique to your background, because you come from a background of being stuck and going, okay, I'm meant to be feeling this, I'm meant to be doing this, I'm meant to be following these protocols and these procedures. But quite frankly, they're driving me a little bit bonkers. So what can I do to express myself? You're creative. And I know that you said that, you with these ADHD tendencies, I actually see you so almost like a kindred spirit in terms of being very A-positive and very much going, oh, that's piqued my interest. I'm going there because my dopamine, my serotonin, all of these juices are being stimulated and I'm interested. So that's where I'm going.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested where I see it can contribute to the improvement of the quality of people's lives and elevating people's satisfaction and sense of fulfillment in their own lives. So, anything that adds to that, I'm fascinated with. And, and there are areas that are of perhaps academic or intellectual interest, but they don't really contribute much to the greater good. So I don't invest too much time towards that. That's sort of like toilet time reading.
Yeah, right. So it's a bit of it's almost like a bit of fodder in terms of, oh yeah, that's really interesting, and that leads to that also being really interesting, but it's actually not improving the community, as in people and those that we live with. It's not improving their lives and their outcomes, and therefore the world that we live in and we share.
That's right.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, I'm really interested in this whole stem cell regeneration, obviously, with coming from an aesthetic point of view and a beauty point of view. And I just want you to tell us in very basic terms, what is a stem cell?
Oh, you got stem cells all through your body. So there are different types of stem cells. There are cells that we call stem cells that some hardcore stem cell scientists may not think the same about. But fundamentally and historically, embryonic stem cells received much attention in the early days. So these are cells derived from I think it's like a 5 to 14 DL blastocyst, an embryo. So you would pull those cells, grow them. What's unique about those types of cells is they have the capacity to differentiate or turn into more specialized types of cells that then can form tissues, organ systems, etc., and create a whole organism. So embryonic stem cells are fascinating for research and development. They haven't proven to be of any real clinical use. So there's a couple of issues there. One is the ethical dilemma around the use of embryos to derive cells. And the other one is when you place these cells in vivo into an organism, a mammal, for example, then there is the risk of the formation of teratomas. So these are like cell masses, almost like tumors. And that's because our adult bodies have never had to confront regulating embryonic stem cells before. So when you put those into an adult body, they are dysregulated in their growth capacity. So there was a famous scientist in Japan called Shinya Yamanaka. In 2006, he published some important work, and in 2012 was awarded the Nobel Prize for the invention of what we call induced pluripotent stem cells, so IPS. So IPS is basically, you can take an adult cell, take a skin cell, for example, and with the introduction of 3-4 genes, specific genes, they're called Yamanaka factors, you can turn that cell back into an embryonic stem cell-like state.
Wow.
So what does that mean? That means it can divide infinitum, so you can just keep growing it, and it can turn into, under certain conditions, any cell in your body. Now, that handles the ethical dilemma. You don't have to take cells from embryos, but you do need to use genetic modification, and then you still have the issue of teratoma formation.
Yes, yes, of course.
Right? So then there are other cells. Every tissue in your body has some kind of progenitor cells that can help its regeneration. And there are certain tissues that have a high number of these, for example, bone marrow. So a bone marrow transplant in and of itself is a stem cell procedure. So you've got these types of cells called mesenchymal stem cells and hematopoietic stem cells. So two different types in bone marrow. Hematopoietic stem cells can turn into blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells. Mesenchymal stem cells have the ability to turn into cartilage, tendon, muscle, fat, even nerve cells. So they have a limited number of cells that they can turn into. And it turns out that these mesenchymal stem cells, you can not only get them from bone marrow, but you can also derive them from fat tissue, which is pretty cool. So per gram of tissue, we can get like 500 times more mesenchymal stem cells from fat than we can from bone marrow, which is great. Most people have enough fat that we can easily just take a little bit. And so fat has this amazing regenerative capacity, and you can pull those regenerative cells from the fat. You can prepare them in a same-day procedure and reintegrate them, whether it be injection straight into an intra-articular space of a joint, or even intravenously. It could be applied aesthetically to supplement fat grafts, for example, to increase the take rate of fat tissue when the fat is transferred. Or you can isolate those stem cells in the laboratory, grow them to high numbers, and cryopreserve them for later use, which means from one tissue harvest, you could isolate and grow your own stem cells, because you and I weren't privileged to have had our cord blood banked. You could have your own fat-derived stem cells banked and made available to you for later use. And repeat dosing for, whether it be to reset your immune system, because these cells have the capacity to regulate or modulate your T regulatory cells. So it can be used for hyperimmune conditions. It can be used to regenerate certain tissue, alleviate pain and inflammatory disorders, or just injected intravenously, potentially for anti-aging purposes.
Wow. And what does it do in terms of it for anti-aging? What does it do? Is it collagen production? Is it?
Yeah, multiple things. So your stem cell pool declines rapidly from your teenage years onwards. And part of the aging process is exacerbated by stem cell exhaustion. So you run out. So if you could harvest your stem cells, bank them, and just top your pool up regularly throughout your adult life, that can contribute to potentially the prevention of aging and age-related diseases. Very early on, there was some Korean scientists that even just took adipose-derived mesenchymal stem cells from humans and injected them into rodents, and it extended the life length of those rodents by at least 30%.
Wow. So and rodents, because rodents don't have a long lifespan, do they? It's a couple of years or something.
Couple of years.
Yeah. So that's quite considerable then, 30%.
Yeah. So
Mm.
if we can extend life length, then that's great. But more importantly, if we can improve the health span and allow people to live healthfully, productively, with
Mm.
more vitality,
Yes,
um, and autonomy, then for as long as possible, I think that's worth it. Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that kind of brings me to wanting to know, what do you think is the main thing that we are doing? I don't want to say wrong, because I don't like we're doing the best that we can do, but what can people do to live better lives, to feel better?
There's got to be a shift in context. So you got to be up to something bigger than yourself,
Yeah.
right? Even those that are just totally dedicated to optimal health, but that's all that their life is about. It's about their own lot in life, how good they look, how, you know, um, on top of the latest supplements they are for themselves. I mean, it contributes very little out here in the world. So if you can create a bigger context and be up to something bigger than yourself, then and if that phenomenon really matters to you, and you want to be able to have the biggest impact for as long as possible, then you're going to have to look after yourself.
Mm.
Right. So it provides a more empowering context for why look after this skin bag. Right.
Mm.
So that's the first thing. Now, to do that, you've got to have some level of awareness and understanding that your body does not belong to you. There's a existential shift that it's possible to happen, and when it does, it's extraordinarily powerful. So this is when you give up the right to view your body as it's mine and mine to do with what I choose. No, your body belongs to something bigger than you. Your body belongs to the people who love you. Your body belongs to the commitments that you're out to fulfill and the communities that you want to serve. So if you start relating to this skin bag with a sense of objectivity,
Mm-hmm.
right, versus being trapped, and this flies in the face of everything that the world is moving towards right now, where it's just completely swamped by an obsession with thoughts and feelings. You
With
have thoughts and feelings.
me, it's all about me. Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's look, and it's not to invalidate thoughts and feelings. They're valid. It's just what those thoughts and feelings are based on is not necessarily true or real. So who are you? Are you your thoughts and feelings? No, maybe you have thoughts and feelings. Even your crappy thoughts, I mean, they're
Mm.
kind of so automatic. You
Mm.
can't control them. So what makes you think that they're yours? No, they're inherited conversations that have been handed down generation after generation for thousands of years. I mean, you and I aren't that original that we came up
Mm.
with, it's too hard, I can't do it, why me? I'm not good enough. Our parents had those thoughts, and their parents, and it's so on, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
if you can't control it, it's like when you're upset. How infuriating is it when someone says to you, don't be upset,
Mm. Mm.
or you shouldn't be upset?
Mm.
Well, I freaking well am. So
Mm.
someone
Mm.
saying that to you, or someone trying to handle your upset, it's futile. It's like, often makes it
It
worse.
does. Yeah.
So you can't, if you can be with the upset and get that, hang on a minute, there's nothing up there making me upset. Maybe the upset's just where I am. Now, what happened? There was an unfulfilled expectation, or an undelivered communication, or thwarted intention, and you got upset. Oh, okay. Now where's the upset? It's in the past. You didn't do anything with it. You didn't interact with it. You didn't try and fix it. You let it be just as it is and just as it's not. You didn't invalidate it or make it wrong. But when you have that level of awareness, then the upset's no longer present. You're just where you're at.
Mm. Mm.
So even when you notice that internal dialogue, the voice in your head, well, who's noticing it when you notice it? Well, maybe that's the self, the real you, whatever that is. So you have a body, you are not your body. You have, just like you have a hand, or if someone hopped into the room right now missing a leg, you wouldn't say they're any less of a person.
Mm.
right? So clearly you are not your body. You have one. So that's a distinction that people need to really powerfully generate and create for themselves. Otherwise, you're always going to be at the effect of thoughts, feelings, whether it be thoughts and memories, mental states, emotional states, body sensations. For a human being, there's not much more going on than those four phenomena. And that's everything internal. But where life happens is out here in the world of performance. So the more you can practice being out here, and human beings are designed to be out here in the world,
Hence our name.
connected to people and life, and having an impact on that. Once you kind of surrender to just those thoughts and feelings, and the size of your life shrinks dramatically, and you have very little power to impact anything other than what's going on right here under your nose. So people who have been stuck in ill health for a long time with a chronic illness, that perhaps it's metabolic disease, type 2 diabetes, they're overweight, there's an inflammatory disorder, maybe they've just don't know what to do with themselves, and what's my gig in life, and they feel a bit lost and dissatisfied. You know, the practice of noticing the machinery as machinery creates enough space for you to get out here and take some distinct actions that could cause you to go down a different pathway and start seeing things newly. So I think that's where you got to start. And then all the nutritional biochemistry distinctions and all of that stuff, the biology, that then is something to be studied inside of a context of performance. You know, what's the point of, like, when I had a clinic, we used to take people's fat tissue and isolate the stem cells in the lab, grow them to high numbers, cryopreserve them, send them back 50 million pure stem cells that belong to that patient, would inject them together with platelet-rich plasma, fresh autologous platelets derived from their blood. And if the stem cells are like the seeds, then the platelets and the growth factors that they release are like fertilizer, right? So would put them into an osteoarthritic joint, and the results were extraordinary, and often prevented the requirement for joint replacement surgery, certainly decreased pain, improved joint mobility, improved quality of life. However, when someone would opt in and I'd be talking them through the process, I'd always be more interested in, if we could reduce the pain 30, 40, 50%, what would you do differently than what you're doing in your life right now? There has to be a context of performance, i.e. action or inaction. Maybe you'd stop doing something, i.e. complaining. B, you might get up to something different. If it's just for you to feel a little bit more comfortable while sitting on the couch watching Netflix, save your money, go on a cruise. Don't do this.
It's not a big enough draw card, is it?
That's right. Now, even if you think, well, I don't want much, I just want to be out of the pain. Well, if you're out of the pain and you're older, maybe it might allow you to get down on the floor and play with the grandkids. You know, so there's a quality of life, but I wouldn't dictate it to the patient. I'd be interested in what is quality of life for them and work with them shoulder to shoulder, listening for their ability to start articulating and expressing a future for them to live into. And without a future to live into, all you're ever going to be left with is more of the past, giving you
reliving that past over and over and over again. Yeah, absolutely. But like you said just a minute ago, you said the past, once something's happened and you've processed what it is, why it's there, and how the effect it's had on you, it's no longer now, it's gone. It's time to move on.
It's in the past. So what's happened in the past has happened. What happened isn't happening right now. So what's persisted over time is whatever decision you've made about what happened, and based on that interpretation, you've decided on who you need to be in the future to survive potentially the threat of that ever happening again. So people become very cautious, people become determined, people become very analytical to the point where, you know, your partner says, I love you, and you're like, why? Right? You can't even be with just something like that, or you're confronted with the opportunity to make a decision, a choice, and you can't. Like, you have to go think about it, but you know, all that energy invested in thinking about it doesn't leave you any more clear about which pathway to go down. Right? Why? You don't trust yourself because you made a decision in the past and it didn't turn out so well. And now you don't trust yourself. You for yourself are not good for your word. And so a number of the clients that we deal with at Simpler Health, one of the, you know, they may have been stuck in you know, in an obese state for a long time. They've tried every diet. They've been in the gym working their backside off 3-4 times a week, and their backside's not coming off. And, you know, then they call us, and, you know, we take them on a journey where they discover a way to master their internal state. So you develop mastery over it versus it always having you, right? And then at the end of it all, the greatest gift is the ability to trust yourself again, where you know yourself is good for your own word. And then you don't need us. You don't need a accountability or coaching structure. It's kind of like, you know, I love it when our clients say to us, you know, kiss my skinny ass, don't need you anymore. Got what I need to sustain this for the rest of my life. Why? Because they for themselves are good for their word.
Yeah, they've learned it. So it's also about not being so afraid of failure. You know, you said about the fact that, you know, you made a decision once, it didn't turn out the way you envisaged it to, or you wanted it to. So you don't trust yourself anymore in that same decision-making process. But what's wrong with failing? What's wrong with getting it wrong and going, oh, actually that didn't work, but who cares? You know, I'm still going to do it again because that's what feels good, and that's what my brain and my body and whatever, that's what I'm being compelled to do in this instant, right here, right now.
Yeah. Well, there's a survival value to the fear of failure, and people go nuts over the fear of failure, and it stops us dead in our tracks oftentimes. So the only reason we're afraid of failing is because we failed sometime in the past, and now we're bringing that into the present future, and that's kind of skewing and influencing our view of what could potentially happen. I mean, the future is as yet unwritten. You know, that chapter is yet to be, and you're the author, but what your brain does. So a gorilla, you know, or an ape walking into a clearing in the jungle, right? And there might be some fruit hanging, and they might pick up a stick and knock that fruit down to access the fruit. But they'll never walk into a clearing and see a stick and go, I might pick that stick up and carry it with me just in case I come across some fruit in the future that's out of reach. They won't do that. We do. We do. So we pick things up along the way and we carry them with us just in case something in the future. So it's a phenomenal evolutionary aspect of our development as human beings, and our brain is a prediction machine. So it predicts the future, but all it's got to predict the future with is the past. So that's why we keep going from job to job and keep getting the same boss or partner to partner, and we end up with the same one. And, you know, and then we kick ourselves. It's like, why do I keep doing the same thing?
And it's like, well, it's actually because it's me. It's me and the things that I'm doing, as opposed to blaming everyone else. Because we're very good. I've got a little saying which is basically there's always a wanker. Yeah, there's in every situation there's always a wanker. And it's kind of like assessing it and going, but if the same thing happens to me more than twice, I'm the reason. I'm the problem. It's not someone else.
Every failed relationship, you're always there.
Absolutely. You're the one,
you're the common denominator.
That's 100% right. It's kind of
so
like
I have something similar. I say to myself, wacko, what do you know? Once again, turns out I'm the dickhead.
I like that. That's
And it's
really good.
powerful. I mean, it's
It is.
confronting when you point the finger here. But if you can step outside of the world of fault and blame,
Mm,
where I'm to fault, I'm at fault, or I'm to blame, then you shrink yourself, because again, fault and blame is all past arrived. But if you can create a whole new view of responsibility, where, okay, I'm there, right? What if, as a matter of choice, I could take on being responsible here? What if the buck stops with me? What can I see? You'll always see some lack of integrity in the past, or something that
mm,
you stepped over, or
mm,
something that you weren't present to, and you kind of mouthed off in a particular way that, if you had your time again, you'd do it. Now, if you can take ownership for that, then guess what? You have 100% of the say for how the next moment goes.
mm,
Now you're not trapped in that domino effect of reactivity, where something happens and then you react, and then you react to your reaction, and then it's like this downward spiral, right?
mm, mm,
You get
mm,
trapped in that, and then every attempt to fix or change what's going on just adds to it. It's called a problem solution mass, where every solution to a problem becomes the next problem. Um, I tell people, I don't know how true this is, but they kind of get the world of it when I say, when Henry Ford mass produced cars with an internal combustion engine, that was a solution to a pollution problem, because there was too
mm,
much fuel on the roads.
mm, mm,
Now that caused another problem, right? So you can keep getting caught in that problem solution mass, and that's just going to continue in the world of change, cause and effect reality. In the world of change, the universe is just, everything changes. Or you can go, hang on a minute. You can just stop, take a breath, and go, let me actually be cause in the matter here, because cause
mm,
and effect for a human being is often an illusion, because there's just really effect, 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 effect.
mm, mm,
And the
mm.
moment you can declare yourself cause, you have a say in the next moment. It's like unbelievably powerful.
Absolutely. It's like you're taking ownership for what happens next, and
Exactly.
ownership for anything that's happened in the past, good and bad, but
Yeah.
you're responsible. And I think that very much in the world of aesthetics and beauty, and the idea that, we need to chase this perfect ideal of what beauty is, and these perfect facial features, which apparently now we can just pop down the road to the corner shop and essentially buy in the form of a syringe. And it's interesting because we think then when they don't make us happy, we don't blame or look at the cause, which is ourselves. We don't sit there and go, oh gosh, okay, so maybe the answer to happiness isn't getting the lips, isn't getting the bigger jawline, the bigger cheeks, the bigger this, and the completely frozen and expressionless face. Maybe that's not the answer to my happiness. Maybe I'm the answer to my happiness, and I need to work out the stuff. And instead of reaching for all the external stuff, going, oh, that's going to make me feel a certain way. Because we see it now. We're very much a quick fix society. We think that we can go on Instagram, on social media, on anything, on TikTok, and go, oh, look, she's happy. She just had her lips done and she's really happy. Look how happy she is. Look, she's got a big smile on her face. She's, woohoo. She's even got a caption that says, I'm so much happier now than I was.
Yes.
And it's like we go and do that. And yeah, we might get that little bit of dopamine and serotonin in the first instance, because there'll be some social acceptance. There'll be some, oh, you look so good. You look so much better, this, that, and the other. But essentially, it's like putting a mask on and then another mask on. And I don't mean a surgical mask. I mean an actual face mask, like a Greek kind of mythology acting mask, where we're covering our true selves each time we do something, if we're not doing it for and from the right reasons.
Mm. Yeah. I think if, someone once said that unexamined life isn't worth living. So there are certain phenomena, and very rarely do people just stop and start to examine and inquire into, just like if you were to inquire into what is beauty, well, what is happy? What is happiness? And Is it a feeling? It could be a created phenomenon. So, you could get a couple of pieces of paper and you could write down everything that makes you happy and everything that makes you unhappy. But then your happiness is circumstantial. You're either circumstantially happy or circumstantially unhappy. And circumstances are just not necessarily within your control. Right? So you do have a say over who you get to be in the face of any or all circumstances. But that say, I mean, that's really the only thing you have any real dominion over, is who you get to be. However, if it doesn't occur to you, though you have a say in that, then you're going to surrender to the world of circumstances. Now, when, for example, someone comes to us and I ask them about their performance outcomes. So your body, even how you age, how you look, how you present yourself in the world, there are certain aspects of that are performance outcomes. In other words, results. These outcomes you don't have a direct say over. People live like they do have a direct say over the results in their life. No, you don't. That would be like if you had a direct say over the performance outcomes. So these are measurable outcomes, such as if you step on the scales and the number comes up, if you scream at that number, like that's the wrong number, or you get on the scales and it says 85 kilograms and you're like, that's the wrong number. Well, that's what it's saying. It doesn't matter how much you scream at it, how upset you feel, how resigned you become, that doesn't change the number. What you do have a direct say over is your performance, action or inaction. That's all that the universe responds to. So if you want to impact that performance outcome, then you need to perform in a distinct way. And who's performing? Well, that's another inquiry. Well, who's taking those actions? Whoever the you is. Is it you given by your circumstances, right? And as I said, just like you don't have a direct say over your performance outcomes, nor do you have any real control over your circumstances. See, you and I live in Sydney, right? So traffic and everything. I don't sit in the traffic. I might be a little bit annoyed at the time, but I don't wake up the next day still pissed off at yesterday's traffic. Why? It's really clear to me. I'm very settled. Like if you were to take a jar of dirty water and you shook it up and you just sat it on the table and let it settle, the dirt would settle. And then the water becomes very clear. You don't have to do anything. You just let it be. And the dirt settles. And then there's some clarity. So I'm really settled that the traffic is circumstantial. So it doesn't have a prolonged, persistent effect on me. But people are that about their internal state. You'll have a thought or a memory or a mental state or an emotional state, and it has a persistent effect on you. Now, if you can relate to, learn to, and it is a practice, okay? It is a practice to relate to your internal state as circumstantial. Like traffic. It's like you notice a thought, you notice a way of being and experience, even if it's happiness. You notice it when it's there, you'll notice it when it's not. There's nothing to do about that. The moment you start making a goal of happiness and chasing after that, you shoot yourself in the foot. It becomes unattainable. Happiness is just another created way of being. And you have the capacity to invent and bring forth infinite ways of being. Don't have to get stuck on one. I'm happy when I'm happy. I'm not when I'm not. And it's not that there's a void either. There's always some other way of being that's displacing it. And to develop an awareness of being able to notice and articulate those distinct ways of being, you'll notice an expansion of your capacity to be any way. And then you can practice different ways of being under different circumstances, which are probably more appropriate.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm just a bit flummoxed. Wow. I love that. That is so, and when you were talking about that, I was just noticing my own state and my own being. And it's just like, I love that analogy of the shaking up a jar full of dirty water and then waiting for the dirt to settle. And then you used a word and you said, and then there's clarity.
Yes.
And I think that's what we don't do enough of now, is just sit and take your time to respond, because we're so instant. Someone wants this, better do it, blah, 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 quick. Whereas I think that, and I think that if we take our time to just sit and see what comes, then that is the right answer at that time.
Yeah. We're just stimulus response machines. And then there are people who will be listening to this going, no, I'm not. I'm much more evolved than that. Really?
Really?
Well,
your cortisol's through the roof because of your...
Exactly, because of what I just said.
Yeah.
Right. So, or even the internal dialogue. It's like, no, I'm very in control of my thoughts. And really, I've coached, trained, and developed Buddhist monks who have sat and meditated for decades on end, and they can't control their thoughts.
That's right.
There's a way of being where you can just let everything be as it is, and when you let it be, it lets you be. And the more you resist something, no, that's not me, or I don't want to be like that. Most of us have issues with our parents. So
I was just thinking parents. As soon as you said that, I was thinking more about my parenting, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, now I feel bad about making Agatha read some of her book before she went to school this morning, because she didn't want to. And I was like, well, you've got this thing this afternoon, you need to, you've had plenty of time over the last week to have done it. Why haven't you done it?
I was sharing with I got this random phone call out of the blue from an old high school teacher.
Oh, yeah.
I left that high school 30 years ago, and, out of the blue, Mr. John Pierce rings up, and this guy's legendary. He's just recently retired after 51 years of teaching. And wow. Anyway, he's on radio now, and we were talking. It's interesting. We had these commonalities in our lives, and one was he had a son who was type 1 diabetic. I had a brother who was type 1 diabetic, and unfortunately both of them passed away within 2 months of each other back in 2011. And I was sharing just how devastating that was for me, and in particular that year. And looking back, I have a greater appreciation of what the failure was that devastated me at the level of who I am for myself. And when I was 6 years of age, my brother was 9 years my senior, my mother said, you're going to become a doctor and find a cure for diabetes and help your brother. Now, in the logic of a 6-year-old, I thought that that's why they had me, just to fix my brother. And so that's how I started to occur for myself. And I thought, well, I've got to earn my worth. And so they keep me around. You just
I know, you poor little thing.
As a kid, right?
Trauma therapy.
Now, my mom, she could have, if she was aware of that, she could have, she devout Roman Catholic Filipino, right? They flagellate themselves. There's just this world of sin and punishment and everything. And she would have punished, but it had nothing to do with her. It was just air came out of her mouth, kind of sounded like however I thought was what was said. And then I made a decision, and that decision was exacerbated by the fact that my brother and sister, who are 9 and 8 years my senior, used to tell me when I was younger that I was a mistake and that life was so much better before I came along. Now, that's just what these
siblings say.
Jealous, whatever, I don't know. But even if that's what they said accurately, that's my recollection of it, right? But I was the one that decided that they were informing me of the truth. And then I lived into the world that got constructed from that context. And it took some time later before I was mature enough, willing enough to take responsibility for maybe I could own that I made that decision. Is it the truth? I don't know, but it is a point of view, a perspective, a way of looking at things that gives me some power to be able to affect and impact who I get to be from this moment forward, rather than being a victim to it. And I think what's happening today is everyone's on this train of obsession, trying to heal past traumas. And I'm all for that. However, the way I see many people going about that is they're perpetuating the impact of that originating trauma, and it's leaving them ongoingly with the experience of being traumatized. And so then they're constantly trying to fix and change it, but there was nothing wrong. Something happened, and many times it's something that shouldn't have happened. And and that's something to have a great deal of compassion for, obviously. But if people want to have some power in their life, then that compassion's got to be in the context of ruthless compassion, where there's deep understanding of what yourself has gone through, and you can forgive that younger version of yourself, etc. But you've got to forgive it. It's an act of generosity, and to create enough space for you to design a future of your invention now. And that's where you get to live a created life, one of your choosing, on your terms, not one dictated by the past, where you're always trying to make up for, prove something, impress, or whatever it is, right? Not disappoint. So I lived into that life of thinking I had to cure a disease. And then when my brother passed away, wow, I had one freaking job and I failed at that, was to keep him alive. And right. So that year was both devastating, but I think appropriately devastating, because whoever I had become in life up until that point needed to die as well. Right. And I had to get and take responsibility for the inauthenticity and the inauthentic life I'd lived up until that point.
How old were you?
That was 12 years ago. I'm 46 now.
So 34.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and life's just constantly happening, and our brain, our central nervous system, is just making decisions, and we get trapped in the righteousness of those points of view, because something happens based on our interpretation, like we construct a story about it. And from that story, we decide a way of being, who I need to be in the future to survive it, to prove something, to avoid the threat of that ever happening again. And then we stop. There's like if you only had a certain number of arrows in your quiver, then that's all you've got to affect life. And you see it all the time. I've got this mate of mine. He's hilarious. He's a comedian, professional comedian. He can't not be funny. Like, right?
It's a good problem to have.
Well, maybe.
True.
Maybe.
But if he's trying to be serious, and he's trying to have a serious conversation with his partner, and all he's doing is cracking jokes, yeah, I can see it would be an issue.
At a funeral, or just at
not
inappropriate
cool.
time.
Not cool.
And it's okay when it's one-on-one. It's an interesting phenomenon when it's one-on-one. It's quite, we're connected and we can have serious conversations. When there's 2 or 3 people there at least, all of a sudden that occurs to him as an audience.
Because his value to himself lies in getting a laugh and making people feel good. Yep.
Right. So, there are people who are very analytical, and there are people who are very determined, and there are people who are very chilled out, and there are pleasers, and all these different ways of being that we say to ourselves and to others, oh, that's just who I am. That's part of my personality. Like it's a fixed phenomenon.
Almost like it's like an excuse when you do speak to people and they say, oh, I couldn't help it, it's just the way I am.
There is some utility to that in reference to others, because it gives you some peace of mind in dealing with others. I mean, they are the way they are because they are the way they are. I mean,
that's true.
Let people be how they are, right? But when it comes to yourself, that, wherever you experience being constrained, wherever there's a lack of power, wherever you're not producing the results that you want to produce in life, then you can take the perspective of maybe who I've become in life isn't real. Maybe I made that up. Let me examine that. And it's hard to do because you're in the middle of it all. So it's
Mm.
much easier when you talk it out, and that's where life happens. And real thinking happens out here. You might know that you write things down. I'm great in front of a whiteboard. All of a sudden, you do a brain dump, or you're in communication, you nut things out with people. That's where real thinking happens. It's very difficult to think at a high level by yourself.
Mm.
That's why to think at a high level, it requires some environmental stimuli, like you go for a walk in nature, for example, or long periods of silence. It takes something like that to allow for high levels of thinking when you're by yourself. Way easier when you can just write it down on a whiteboard or talk to someone. Other than that, there's just thoughts. And, those thoughts are weird, and often just, if you put your thoughts on loudspeaker throughout the day, I mean, you'd be locked up.
Oh my, so much covered. So much covered, but so much still to go. So please come back and listen to episode 2 with my amazing friend, Dean Kilby. Bye.